In the deepest reaches of the Andromeda sector, where stars died screaming and darkness itself seemed to writhe with malevolent purpose, something stirred. It had slumbered for eons, dreaming dreams that turned galaxies to ash and whispered secrets that drove entire civilizations to madness. But today, it would meet its match in the most unlikely of forms. A middle-aged human named Margaret Chen, clutching a thermos of chamomile tea. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. This story begins not with cosmic horror, but with something far more mundane and infinitely more dangerous: human kindness paired with hot beverages. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The first recorded incident occurred on a Tuesday morning at 0847 Standard Galactic Time aboard the merchant vessel Prosperity's Edge. Commander Thalen Vor, a seasoned Altarian with silver-scaled skin and compound eyes that had witnessed 3 decades of interstellar commerce, was reviewing cargo manifests when his communications officer interrupted with urgent news. "Sir, we're receiving a distress signal from the mining platform Delta 7. Their automated systems are reporting a complete breakdown in their atmospheric processors. They have approximately 4 hours of breathable air remaining." Thalen's scales rippled with concern. Delta 7 housed over 3,000 miners from 17 different species, and their remote location in the asteroid belt made rescue operations nearly impossible within the given timeframe. The platform's atmospheric processors were notoriously complex, requiring specialized technicians and equipment that would take days to assemble and transport. "Patch me through to their chief engineer," Thalen commanded. The view screen flickered to life, revealing the worried face of Chief Engineer Korix, a Centaurian whose normally blue complexion had taken on a sickly purple hue. Behind him, emergency lights bathed the engineering deck in an ominous red glow. "Commander Vor, thank the stars you responded. We've got a catastrophic failure in the primary atmospheric recycling system. The quantum filtration matrix has completely destabilized, and the backup systems are failing one by one. We've tried everything our technical manuals suggest, but nothing works. The chemistry involved is beyond our current capabilities." Thalen was about to offer what little assistance his merchant vessel could provide when a new voice joined the conversation. It belonged to Dr. Sarah Mitchell, a human xenobiologist who had booked passage on the Prosperity's Edge to study crystalline formations in the Vega system. "Excuse me, but did you say the atmospheric processors were failing? That sounds terrible. Would you like me to take a look?" Both Thalen and Korix turned to stare at the human woman. She appeared to be in her early 40s, with graying brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and wearing a simple jumpsuit. Most notably, she held a steaming mug of what appeared to be some kind of herbal tea. "Dr. Mitchell," Thalen said carefully, "atmospheric processing systems require years of specialized training to understand, let alone repair. The quantum chemistry alone involves calculations that our best supercomputers struggle with." Sarah smiled warmly and took a sip of her tea. "Oh, I'm sure it's not that complicated. I used to help my neighbor fix his greenhouse ventilation system back on Earth. How different could it be?" The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of alarms echoing through Delta 7's corridors. Finally, Korix spoke up, his voice strained with desperation. "Dr. Mitchell, I appreciate your willingness to help, but this is a matter of life and death for 3,000 beings. These systems control the atmospheric composition of an entire mining platform. One mistake could kill everyone aboard." Sarah nodded thoughtfully, then did something that would later be recorded in the galactic archives as the first documented case of what scientists would term the tea phenomenon. "Well," she said, extending her mug toward Thalen, "would you mind holding my tea? I'd like to take a closer look at your atmospheric processors." What happened next defied every known principle of engineering, physics, and common sense. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, armed with nothing but basic scientific knowledge and an inexplicable confidence in her ability to help, proceeded to diagnose and repair the mining platform's atmospheric systems through a series of suggestions that should have been impossible. Speaking calmly into the communication channel, she guided Chief Engineer Korix through a process that involved redirecting power through what she called the blue tubes, adjusting the quantum filtration matrix by making it spin the other way, and stabilizing the atmospheric composition by, quote, adding a bit more of the good stuff and less of the bad stuff. The engineering team on Delta 7 watched in stunned silence as Sarah's simple instructions somehow caused their impossibly complex systems to not only function but operate at peak efficiency. The atmospheric processors, which had been failing catastrophically just minutes before, began producing air of such high quality that several miners reported feeling more energetic than they had in years. "How?" Korix whispered, his purple complexion returning to a healthy blue. "How did you know to do that?" Sarah retrieved her tea from the bewildered Thalen and took another sip. "Oh, it was just like my neighbor's greenhouse. Sometimes you just need to think about what the plants need and work backwards from there. In this case, you had too much carbon dioxide building up in the recycling loop, so I figured we should just give it somewhere else to go." The fact that Sarah had just solved the problem that had stumped teams of certified atmospheric engineers using an analogy about greenhouse plants was not lost on anyone present. But what truly concerned Commander Thalen was the expression on Dr. Mitchell's face as she spoke. She looked genuinely surprised that anyone would find her solution remarkable. 3 days later, the incident at Delta 7 was still being discussed in engineering circles across the galaxy when the second case occurred. This time, it was aboard the luxury liner Starlight Serenade, where a malfunction in the ship's artificial gravity generators had created a dangerous situation in the main dining hall. The ship's chief engineer, a methodical Rigelian named Vex Thornwick, had been struggling with the problem for hours. The gravity generators were producing unstable fields that caused objects and passengers to float randomly, creating both a safety hazard and a public relations nightmare for the luxury cruise line. "The graviton field oscillations are completely chaotic," Vex explained to Captain Reese, a human woman who had been commanding starships for over 20 years. "We need to shut down the entire gravity system and rebuild the field matrix from scratch. It will take at least 18 hours, and our passengers will have to remain in zero gravity for the duration." Captain Reese was about to approve the plan when she noticed one of the passengers, an elderly human gentleman named Professor William Hartwell, observing the floating chaos with what appeared to be academic interest. The professor was a retired physics teacher who had booked the cruise to celebrate his 70th birthday. "Professor Hartwell," Captain Reese called out, "I don't suppose you have any insights into our gravity problem?" The professor looked up from his contemplation of a floating dinner roll that seemed to be orbiting a chandelier. He was holding a cup of what appeared to be Earl Grey tea, and his eyes had the familiar twinkle that his former students would have recognized as the precursor to one of his famous, simple explanations. "Well, Captain, I've been watching the patterns, and it reminds me of something I used to demonstrate to my students using pendulums and magnetic fields. The graviton oscillations aren't random at all, they're following a predictable pattern. It's rather like a symphony that's gotten out of tempo." Vex's antennae twitched with scientific interest. "Professor, with all due respect, artificial gravity systems operate on principles of exotic matter manipulation and quantum field theory. The mathematical models alone require—" "Oh, I'm sure the math is quite complex," Professor Hartwell interrupted gently. "But the principle is really quite simple. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Would you mind holding my tea? I think I can help sort this out." Captain Reese accepted the professor's teacup with a growing sense of déjà vu. She had heard rumors about the incident at Delta 7, but had dismissed them as exaggerated tales from merchant spacers. What followed was a masterclass in applied physics that would have made Einstein weep with either joy or confusion. Professor Hartwell, speaking in the same patient tone he had once used to explain gravity to high school students, began to walk Vex through a series of adjustments to the gravity generators. "You see," he explained, "the problem is that your graviton emitters are working against each other instead of together. It's like having multiple conductors trying to lead the same orchestra. What we need to do is establish a primary rhythm and let the others follow." The professor's instructions were delivered with the same casual confidence he had once used to explain why objects fall toward the Earth. He suggested adjusting the graviton field frequency to match the natural resonance of the ship's hull, synchronizing the emitters to create a more harmonious gravitational melody, and fine-tuning the field strength to achieve a gentle, even pull that feels like a warm hug. Vex, despite his training and experience, found himself following the professor's guidance with increasing amazement, Each adjustment not only worked, but seemed to improve the overall stability of the gravity system beyond its original specifications. Within 2 hours, the Starlight Serenade's artificial gravity was operating more smoothly than it had since the ship's construction. The passengers were delighted to find that the improved gravity fields made walking feel more natural and comfortable than ever before. "Professor," Vex said, his voice filled with wonder, "your solution has increased our gravity system efficiency by 37%. How did you know that synchronizing the emitters would create such stable fields?" Professor Hartwell retrieved his tea and took a thoughtful sip. "Well, it's really just basic physics, isn't it? Everything wants to work together harmoniously. Sometimes we just need to show it how." The incident aboard the Starlight Serenade was recorded in the ship's log and reported to the Galactic Maritime Authority as a routine maintenance success. However, certain details, particularly the fact that a retired high school teacher had solved complex gravitational engineering problems using musical metaphors, were noted by officials who were beginning to recognize a pattern. The third documented case occurred just 5 days later at the New Geneva Research Station, where a team of the galaxy's most brilliant scientists had been struggling with a seemingly impossible problem for over 6 months. Their project involved creating a stable wormhole for instantaneous communication across galactic distances, but every attempt had resulted in catastrophic failure. Dr. Zara Okafor, the project's lead physicist, had assembled a team of experts from 12 different species, each bringing unique perspectives on space-time manipulation, quantum tunneling, and exotic matter containment. Despite their combined expertise, the wormhole invariably collapsed within seconds of formation, releasing dangerous amounts of radiation and occasionally creating small temporal anomalies that caused Tuesday to briefly become Thursday. The research station's cafeteria had become an unofficial meeting place for the frustrated scientists, who gathered daily to discuss their failures over meals and beverages. It was here that Dr. Okafor first encountered Elena Rodriguez, a human maintenance worker who had been assigned to the station as part of an interspecies employment exchange program. Elena was a cheerful woman in her 30s who had worked as a plumber on Mars before applying for the exchange program. She had no formal education in physics beyond high school, but she had an innate curiosity about how things worked and a remarkable ability to see simple solutions to complex problems. "Dr. Okafor," Elena said one afternoon, approaching the physicist's table with a steaming mug of hot chocolate, "I've been watching you and your team work on that wormhole project, and I was wondering if you might want a fresh perspective." Dr. Okafor looked up from her calculations, her fatigue evident in the dark circles under her eyes. "Elena, I appreciate your interest, but we're dealing with theoretical physics at the highest level. The mathematics alone involves 17-dimensional field equations that require quantum supercomputers to solve." "I understand it's complicated," Elena replied, sitting down across from the physicist, "but sometimes when I'm fixing a really stubborn pipe blockage, I find that stepping back and thinking about the problem differently helps. Like, what if the wormhole doesn't want to stay open because you're forcing it instead of inviting it?" The other scientists at nearby tables had begun to listen to the conversation, some with amusement and others with poorly concealed irritation. Dr. Wilix Vronter, a Procurian theoretical physicist known for his pioneering work on dimensional topology, spoke up with barely disguised condescension. "Miss Rodriguez, wormhole formation is not analogous to residential plumbing. We're manipulating the fundamental structure of space-time itself. The energy requirements alone are equivalent to the output of a small star." Elena nodded thoughtfully and took a sip of her hot chocolate. "That does sound like a lot of energy. But, when I was working on the water recycling systems on Mars, we had a similar problem with flow dynamics. We kept trying to force the water through the system, but it wasn't until we adjusted the pressure gradients to work with the natural flow patterns that everything started working properly." Dr. Okafor found herself intrigued despite her exhaustion. "What do you mean by natural flow patterns?" "Well," Elena said, warming to her subject, "water wants to flow downhill, right? But space-time might have its own preferred directions. Maybe instead of trying to punch a hole through it, you could find where it already wants to bend and just encourage it a little?" The silence that followed was broken by Dr. Vronter's derisive laugh. "Miss Rodriguez, space-time doesn't want anything. It's not a conscious entity that can be reasoned with or encouraged. It follows precise mathematical laws that, would you mind holding my hot chocolate?" Elena interrupted, extending her mug toward Dr. Okafor. "I'd like to take a look at your wormhole generator. Maybe I can spot something you've missed." Dr. Okafor accepted the mug with a mixture of curiosity and desperation. 6 months of failure had left her willing to consider even the most unlikely possibilities. What happened next would later be classified as a breakthrough in theoretical physics, though the methods used would never be fully understood by the scientific community. Elena Rodriguez, armed with nothing but basic mechanical intuition and an unshakable belief that every problem had a solution, began to examine the wormhole generator with the same methodical approach she had once used to diagnose plumbing issues. "See, here's your problem," she said, pointing to a component that the research team had spent weeks calibrating. "You're trying to create the opening first and then stabilize it, but that's like trying to blow a soap bubble by forcing air through a straw. You need to create the surface tension first, then introduce the opening." Dr. Okafor translated Elena's observations into scientific terms, realizing that the maintenance worker was suggesting a fundamental change in their approach to exotic matter manipulation. Instead of creating a violent rupture in space-time, Elena was proposing a gentler method that worked with the natural elasticity of dimensional barriers. "The energy field gradients," Dr. Okafor murmured, her excitement growing. "If we invert the initialization sequence and allow the exotic matter to establish quantum coherence before introducing the spatial distortion." Elena nodded encouragingly. "Exactly. It's like threading a needle. You don't force the thread through. You guide it gently until it finds its own way." The modifications Elena suggested were implemented over the following week, with Dr. Okafor serving as translator between the maintenance worker's intuitive understanding and the mathematical requirements of the project. When they finally activated the modified wormhole generator, the results exceeded everyone's expectations. The wormhole not only formed successfully but remained stable for over 6 hours, allowing the research team to establish their first successful communication link with a research station in the Magellanic Clouds. The energy requirements were 40% lower than their theoretical models had predicted, and the exotic matter containment system operated with unprecedented efficiency. "Elena," Dr. Okafor said, returning the now empty hot chocolate mug, "your insights have revolutionized our understanding of dimensional engineering. How did you know that inverting the initialization sequence would create such stable field dynamics?" Elena smiled and shrugged. "I didn't know it would work. I just figured that if space-time is anything like water pipes, it probably doesn't like being pushed around too much. Sometimes you just need to ask nicely." The success of the New Geneva Wormhole project marked the beginning of what would later be recognized as a galaxy-wide phenomenon. Reports began to flow in from research stations, commercial vessels, and military installations across known space, all describing similar incidents involving humans offering simple solutions to complex problems after requesting that someone hold their beverage. The pattern was always the same. A human would encounter a problem that had stumped experts, politely ask someone to hold their tea, coffee, or other beverage, and then proceed to solve the issue using methods that were both effective and theoretically impossible. On the mining world of Kepler-442b, a human geologist named Robert Chen asked a colleague to hold his thermos of green tea before somehow teaching the planet's sentient crystal formations to reorganize themselves into more efficient mining patterns. The crystals, which had been hostile to all previous mining attempts, began producing refined metals voluntarily after what Robert described as, quote, "a nice chat about mutual cooperation." At the Titan Medical Research Facility, Dr. Jennifer Walsh handed her coffee mug to a nurse before successfully treating a rare Andromedan fever that had baffled medical professionals for decades. Her treatment protocol involved talking to the infection like it was a confused houseguest, and administering what she called comfort medicine that somehow encouraged the alien pathogens to peacefully exit their hosts. The phenomena extended beyond technical and medical applications. On the diplomatic station orbiting Proxima Centauri, human ambassador David Kim asked a security guard to hold his chai latte before mediating a peace treaty between two species that had been engaged in warfare for over 3 centuries. His negotiation strategy involved helping them remember that they were neighbors and organizing what he called a really good potluck dinner. Each incident followed the same impossible pattern. A human would encounter a problem, ask someone to hold their beverage, and then solve the issue through methods that were simultaneously effective and completely inexplicable to trained professionals. The scientific community's response to these reports was initially skeptical, then confused, and finally desperate. The Galactic Science Council convened an emergency session to address what they termed the T phenomenon, though their discussions yielded more questions than answers. Dr. Quintus Meridian, the Council's chief theoretical physicist, presented a comprehensive analysis of the documented cases. Colleagues, we are faced with a phenomenon that challenges our fundamental understanding of problem-solving, expertise, and the nature of knowledge itself. In case after case, we observe humans achieving impossible results through methods that our best theories cannot explain. The assembled scientists, representing the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy, struggled to find a rational explanation for the pattern they were witnessing. Some proposed that humans possessed an unknown form of psychic ability that allowed them to manipulate reality through sheer will. Others suggested that the beverage consumption ritual was somehow linked to enhanced cognitive function or intuitive processing. The most disturbing theory came from Dr. Helix Vortman, a specialist in chaos theory and emergent systems. Perhaps, he suggested, the humans are not solving these problems through any special ability. Perhaps they are succeeding because they do not understand that the problems are supposed to be impossible. This observation sent a ripple of unease through the scientific community. The idea that ignorance might be more powerful than knowledge, that a lack of understanding could somehow enable impossible achievements, challenged everything they believed about the nature of expertise and learning. As reports of the T phenomenon continued to multiply, various institutions began to take notice. The Galactic Maritime Authority issued a bulletin to all commercial vessels, advising captains to, quote, consider consulting any human passengers before declaring technical problems unsolvable. Quote, the Interstellar Medical Association started a database to track cases where human medical intuition had succeeded, where advanced alien medicine had failed. Most significantly, the Galactic Defense Force began to quietly document instances where human problem-solving had military applications. On the border world of Epsilon Eridani, a human supply clerk named Maria Santos had asked a lieutenant to hold her coffee before somehow convincing a hostile alien war machine to switch sides by, quote, explaining that violence wasn't really solving anyone's problems. The implications of these incidents were not lost on military strategists. If humans could indeed solve impossible problems through methods that defied conventional understanding, their potential value as assets in conflict situations was enormous. More troubling was the possibility that humanity's problem-solving abilities might be beyond the understanding or control of their galactic neighbors. The first formal investigation into the T phenomenon was launched by the Institute for Advanced Xenopsychology, under the direction of Dr. Lyra Blackwood, a Scientific researcher who specialized in the study of consciousness and cognitive processing across species. Her team included experts in neurology, quantum psychology, and what was termed applied impossibility theory. Dr. Blackwood's initial findings were published in the Journal of Galactic Psychology under the title Beverage-Mediated Problem Resolution, a preliminary study of human cognitive anomalies. The paper documented 47 cases of the T phenomenon, analyzing the common elements and attempting to identify the underlying mechanisms. In every documented case, Dr. Blackwood wrote, the human subject demonstrates complete confidence in their ability to solve the problem at hand, regardless of their formal qualifications or the theoretical impossibility of success. This confidence appears to be ritually reinforced through the act of transferring their beverage to another individual, as if the removal of the beverage somehow freed them from normal cognitive constraints. The paper's conclusion was both fascinating and deeply unsettling. We propose that human problem-solving abilities may be inversely correlated with their understanding of why problems should be impossible. The beverage transfer ritual may serve as a psychological trigger that enables humans to approach problems without the limiting assumptions that prevent other species from achieving similar results. Dr. Blackwood's research was groundbreaking, but it raised more questions than it answered. If humans could indeed solve impossible problems by simply not understanding their impossibility, what did this mean for the nature of knowledge and expertise? Were the galaxy's most advanced civilizations actually handicapped by their own understanding of theoretical limitations? The implications extended beyond academic curiosity. If the T phenomenon was real and reproducible, it represented a fundamental shift in how problems might be approached across the galaxy. The carefully constructed hierarchies of expertise that governed everything from engineering to diplomacy might need to be reconsidered in light of humanity's apparently supernatural problem-solving abilities. As news of Dr. Blackwood's research spread through the scientific community, reactions varied from fascination to alarm. Some researchers called for immediate collaboration with human subjects to better understand the phenomenon. Others warned that relying on inexplicable problem-solving methods could lead to dangerous consequences that might not become apparent until it was too late. The debate was still raging when the fourth major incident occurred, this time on a scale that would capture the attention of the entire galaxy. The location was the Arcturus system, where a routine scientific survey had awakened something that had been sleeping in the dark spaces between stars for millions of years. The survey ship Cosmic Wanderer, under the command of Captain Alexei Petrov, had been conducting routine scans of the system's outer planets when their sensors detected an anomaly in the void between the fourth and fifth worlds. What they found defied classification, a massive structure of unknown origin that seemed to exist partially outside normal spacetime. Dr. Elizabeth Reeves, the ship's chief xenoarchaeologist, was the first to realize the significance of their discovery. "Captain, this isn't just an artifact, it's showing signs of active consciousness. The quantum signatures suggest it's been dormant for eons, but our scans may have triggered some kind of awakening response." Captain Petrov, a veteran of first contact situations, immediately ordered the ship to maintain a safe distance while they attempted to understand what they were dealing with. But it was already too late. The entity they had disturbed was ancient beyond measure, vast beyond comprehension, and utterly hostile to the existence of organic life. As the cosmic horror began to stir from its eons-long slumber, reality itself seemed to writhe and buckle around it. The ship's instruments recorded impossible readings, negative energy signatures, temporal distortions that made cause-follow effect, and gravitational anomalies that created local regions where physics appeared to be running backwards. "Captain," Dr. Reeves reported, her voice strained with barely controlled terror, "it's not just waking up. It's angry. The quantum resonance patterns suggest it views our presence as an intolerable violation of its domain. And sir, the energy signatures are increasing exponentially. If this continues, it could destabilize the entire system." Captain Petrov was about to order an emergency retreat when he noticed that one member of his crew appeared remarkably calm despite the chaos unfolding around them. Dr. Margaret Chen, the ship's botanist, was sitting quietly in the corner of the bridge, sipping what appeared to be chamomile tea from a thermos. Dr. Chen was a soft-spoken woman in her 50s who had joined the crew to study plant adaptations in low-gravity environments. She had a reputation for being unflappable in crisis situations, but her serenity in the face of cosmic horror was remarkable even by her standards. "Dr. Chen," Captain Petrov called out, "I don't suppose you have any insights into our current situation?" Margaret looked up from her tea with the same gentle expression she might have worn while tending to her greenhouse. "Well, Captain, it seems like our new friend is upset about being awakened. That's understandable. I don't like being disturbed when I'm sleeping either. Perhaps we should try to make amends." The suggestion was met with stunned silence. Dr. Reeves was the first to respond, her voice rising with stress and disbelief. "Dr. Chen, that entity is a cosmic horror of unimaginable power. It's beyond our understanding, beyond our ability to communicate with or comprehend. It exists on a scale that makes our entire civilization seem like dust motes in comparison." Margaret nodded thoughtfully and took another sip of her tea. "That does sound lonely. Perhaps it just needs someone to talk to." The bridge crew exchanged glances that ranged from concern to outright alarm. The entity's influence was growing stronger by the moment, and reality distortions were beginning to affect the ship's systems. Several crew members reported seeing impossible geometries in the corners of their vision, while others complained of hearing whispers in languages that predated the formation of matter itself. "Dr. Chen," Captain Petrov said carefully, "I appreciate your compassion, but this is far beyond the scope of normal diplomatic contact. That entity could unmake our entire star system with a thought. We need to retreat immediately and call for military assistance." Margaret stood up and walked over to the captain, extending her thermos toward him with the same gentle smile she had worn throughout the crisis. "Captain, Would you mind holding my tea? I think I'd like to have a chat with our visitor. The moment Captain Petrov accepted the thermos, alarms began blaring throughout the ship. The entity's response to Margaret's approach was immediate and violent. Space-time twisted around the cosmic wanderer as the cosmic horror focused its attention on the small human who had dared to address it directly. But Margaret Chen, armed with nothing but decades of experience in nurturing growing things and an unshakable belief in the power of polite conversation, was about to attempt something that would either save the galaxy or doom it to unimaginable horror. The first part of humanity's strangest diplomatic mission was about to begin, and the universe itself held its breath in anticipation of what would happen when infinite cosmic rage met infinite human kindness over a cup of tea. The Galactic Emergency Council convened within hours of receiving the distress signal from the cosmic wanderer. The ancient chamber on Nexus Prime, carved from crystallized starlight and designed to withstand reality-warping events, had never hosted a crisis of this magnitude. Representatives from 47 species materialized through quantum gates, their various forms of existence unified only by their shared terror. High Administrator Keth Valorian, whose species had survived the last cosmic horror awakening 3 million years ago, called the assembly to order. His translucent form pulsed with urgent bioluminescence as he addressed the gathered representatives. Colleagues, we face an extinction-level threat. Long-range sensors confirm that entity designation Omega-9 has achieved full consciousness in the Arcturus system. Historical records indicate that this being was responsible for the Great Silence that consumed 17 galaxies during the previous cosmic epoch. We have perhaps 72 standard hours before its influence spreads beyond containment. Fleet Admiral Zara Nexus, commander of the Combined Defense Forces, stepped forward. Her cybernetic implants flickered with tactical data as she presented the military assessment. All available battle fleets are converging on the Arcturus system, but our projections are grim. Omega-9 exists partially outside normal spacetime, making conventional weapons ineffective. Our most powerful reality anchors might slow its expansion for a few hours at best. Dr. Vex Kronos, the galaxy's leading expert on cosmic horrors, activated a holographic display showing the entity's expanding influence. The awakening pattern matches historical precedents perfectly. First, local space-time distortions. Then, the corruption of matter at the quantum level. Finally, the complete unraveling of physical laws within an ever-expanding sphere of influence. Once it reaches critical mass, the effect becomes irreversible. Representative Leth of the Crystalline Collective raised her resonant voice. What of evacuation protocols? Surely we can preserve some populations beyond the entity's reach. Dr. Kronos' display shifted to show exponential expansion curves. At current growth rates, Omega-9's influence will encompass our entire galactic cluster within 1 standard year. There is nowhere to run. Our only options are to stop it here or accept the extinction of all sentient life in this region of space. The chamber erupted in overlapping conversations as species-specific panic responses manifested. The ethereal commune began their death songs, while the machine collective initiated emergency backup protocols for their consciousness networks. The Hive Queens released pheromone clouds of despair that required immediate atmospheric filtration. High Administrator Valorian restored order with a pulse of command frequency light. Dr. Kronos, what methods were used to defeat cosmic horrors in previous encounters? The xenoarchaeologist's expression darkened. Historical records are incomplete, but the few surviving accounts suggest that previous victories required sacrificing entire star systems to create quantum barriers. The ancients developed reality bombs that could wound cosmic horrors, but the collateral damage was equivalent to galactic genocide. Even then, they only managed to force the entities into dormancy, not true death. Admiral Nexus consulted her tactical displays. Our current arsenal includes 12 reality bombs, but deploying them in the Arcturus system would sterilize everything within a 50-light-year radius. We would be trading the horror's expansion for the immediate destruction of billions of innocent lives. The debate that followed consumed precious hours as representatives argued over impossible choices. Some advocated for immediate deployment of reality weapons, accepting the massive casualties as necessary for galactic survival. Others insisted on evacuation attempts despite their futility. A few species simply declared their intention to face extinction with dignity rather than resort to genocide. The deadlock was broken by an unexpected voice. Dr. Miranda Ashworth, the human representative and former director of the Xenological Institute, had been quietly observing the proceedings while sipping tea from an insulated travel mug. Her calm demeanor stood in stark contrast to the mounting hysteria around her. "Excuse me," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos with surprising authority. "Has anyone actually tried talking to this entity?" The suggestion was met with stunned silence, followed by what could only be described as polite horror. Dr. Kronos was the first to respond, his voice strained with academic precision. "Dr. Ashworth, cosmic horrors exist on a scale beyond mortal comprehension. They are older than most stars, vaster than solar systems, and driven by motivations that would shatter sapient minds. Communication is not merely impossible, it's conceptually meaningless." Miranda nodded thoughtfully and took another sip of her tea. "I understand they're very old and powerful, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're evil. Maybe they're just misunderstood? I mean, if something had been sleeping peacefully for millions of years and suddenly got woken up by strangers poking around their bedroom, they'd probably be cranky too." The xenobiologist's analysis triggered a cascade of increasingly agitated responses from the assembled representatives. The Silicon Senate spokesperson emitted error codes that translated roughly to concepts of fundamental impossibility. The Psionic Assembly's collective consciousness recoiled so violently from the suggestion that 3 of their members temporarily lost coherence. Admiral Nexus leaned forward, her expression mixing professional concern with personal bewilderment. "Dr. Ashworth, our combat analysis indicates that Omega-9 has already destroyed 14 reconnaissance drones and 3 scout ships. Its hostile intent is unambiguous." "Well," Miranda replied, setting down her mug with a thoughtful expression, "maybe it's just scared. Big, ancient, and powerful doesn't necessarily mean confident or well-adjusted. Sometimes the scariest creatures are the most frightened ones." High Administrator Valorian's bioluminescence shifted to patterns that roughly translated as profound existential confusion. "Dr. Ashworth, you speak of entity Omega-9 as if it were a distressed animal rather than a cosmic force of annihilation. The fundamental nature of these beings transcends conventional understanding of psychology or motivation." Miranda smiled with the same gentle patience she had once used to explain evolution to skeptical students. "Maybe that's the problem. We keep thinking of it as some incomprehensible force instead of just a very old, very tired being that got woken up at the wrong time. You know, when my grandmother was in the hospital during her final years, she sometimes lashed out at the nurses because she was scared and confused. She wasn't evil, just overwhelmed." The comparison between a cosmic horror and an elderly human woman created what historians would later record as the first documented case of pan-galactic cognitive dissonance. Several representatives required medical attention as their philosophical frameworks attempted to process the analogy. Dr. Kronos finally found his voice, though it trembled with barely contained academic outrage. "Dr. Ashworth, your grandmother was not capable of unmaking the fundamental structure of reality through her emotional distress. The comparison is not merely inappropriate, it's dangerously naive." Miranda finished her tea and looked around the chamber with the same expression she might have worn while considering a particularly challenging research problem. "Maybe, but what if we're wrong? What if these cosmic horrors aren't monsters at all, just really old beings who never learned how to communicate properly? I mean, if you'd been alone in the dark for millions of years, you might forget how to be social too." The debate that followed would have continued indefinitely if not for an urgent transmission from the Arcturus system. Captain Petrov appeared on the main display, his face haggard with exhaustion and something that might have been shell shock. "Emergency Council. This is Captain Petrov, of the Cosmic Wanderer. I'm transmitting from our emergency shelter on Arcturus Prime. The situation has changed. Dr. Chen, our botanist, is currently in what can only be described as diplomatic contact with Omega-9. The council chamber erupted in chaos as representatives struggled to process this information. Admiral Nexus was the first to recover her composure enough to respond. "Captain, clarify your status. Are you reporting successful communication with a cosmic horror?" Petrov's expression suggested a man who had witnessed events that challenged his basic understanding of reality. "Admiral, I honestly don't know how to categorize what's happening. Dr. Chen approached the entity approximately 6 hours ago. Instead of the immediate annihilation we expected, she appears to be having a conversation with it. Dr. Kronos materialized closer to the display, his academic excitement overriding his previous skepticism. Captain, describe the nature of this alleged communication. What protocols is Dr. Chen following? What protective measures are in place? That's just it, Doctor. She's not following any protocols. She simply walked up to the edge of the entity's reality distortion field, sat down on a convenient asteroid, and started talking to it like she was chatting with a neighbor over the garden fence. She's been offering it different varieties of tea and asking about its health. The transmission quality began to deteriorate as reality distortions interfered with the quantum communication link. Captain Petrov's image flickered between multiple dimensional phases before stabilizing into something approximately human-shaped. Council, I need to report that the entity's expansion has stopped. Completely. The reality distortions are still present, but they're no longer growing. Dr. Chen claims that Omega-9 is, quote, taking a break to think things over, and has agreed to, quote, try not to accidentally unmake any more star systems while they continue their discussion. High Administrator Valorian's bioluminescence cycled through colors that had no equivalent in any known emotional spectrum. Captain, you're reporting that a human botanist has successfully negotiated a ceasefire with a cosmic horror using informal conversation and beverage service? Sir, I'm reporting what I'm observing. Dr. Chen is currently explaining the principles of photosynthesis to an entity older than our galaxy, and it appears to be listening with what I can only describe as polite interest. She's also mentioned something about helping it work through some feelings and has requested that we send down several varieties of herbal tea. The communication link dissolved into static as the quantum field fluctuations overwhelmed the transmission equipment. The Emergency Council was left to contemplate the impossible reports they had just received. Dr. Ashworth stood up and retrieved her empty mug, her expression thoughtful but unsurprised. Well, that sounds like Margaret. She always was good with difficult patients. During our residency together, she once calmed down a Regelian battle beast by explaining plant biology to it. Apparently, it had never understood how flowers worked. Admiral Nexus stared at the human representative with an expression that suggested she was reconsidering everything she thought she knew about military strategy. Dr. Ashworth, are you suggesting that we should be approaching cosmic horrors with horticultural therapy rather than reality bombs? I'm suggesting that maybe we should try understanding them before we try destroying them. After all, if Margaret is right and they're just very old, very lonely beings who never learn proper social skills, then treating them like monsters might be exactly the wrong approach. The debate that followed marked a turning point in galactic civilization's understanding of cosmic threats. For the first time in recorded history, a cosmic horror had been successfully engaged in peaceful contact rather than immediate warfare. The implications were staggering and terrifying in equal measure. Dr. Kronos initiated emergency research protocols to study the developing situation. I'm authorizing the deployment of our most advanced observation equipment to the Arcturus system. If Dr. Chen has indeed established communication with Omega-9, we need to document every aspect of the interaction. The Crystalline Collective's representative raised concerns about precedent and protocol. What happens if this approach fails? If Dr. Chen's diplomatic efforts collapse, we'll have lost valuable time that could have been used for evacuation or military preparation. Admiral Nexus was already coordinating with her tactical commanders. I'm maintaining battle readiness across all fleets, but I'm also authorizing the deployment of our xenopsychology specialists to support Dr. Chen's efforts. If peaceful resolution is possible, it's our duty to pursue it. As the Emergency Council struggled to adapt their crisis management protocols to accommodate the possibility of cosmic horror diplomacy, reports began filtering in from across the galaxy. The news of humanity's latest impossible achievement spread through academic circles, military commands, and civilian populations with unprecedented speed. The Andromedan Institute of Advanced Physics immediately suspended their research into reality weapons to focus on what they termed the consciousness approach to cosmic threat management. The Galactic Medical Council began reviewing historical data for other cases where therapeutic intervention might have been more effective than military action. Most significantly, The discovery that cosmic horrors might be approachable through conversation rather than conquest forced a fundamental reevaluation of galactic defense doctrine. If beings previously considered unstoppable forces of destruction could be reasoned with, the implications for interstellar politics were profound. The Theta Quadrant Collective issued a statement declaring their intention to review all previous cosmic horror encounters to determine whether diplomatic solutions had been prematurely dismissed. The Machine Intelligence Network began developing new protocols for distinguishing between genuinely hostile entities and beings that were simply misunderstood. Meanwhile, in the depths of space beyond the Arcturus system, other ancient entities began to stir. Long-range sensors detected movement in the void regions where cosmic horrors had slumbered for eons. Whether they were responding to Omega-9's awakening or to the unprecedented nature of its peaceful contact with organic life remained unclear. Dr. Ashworth found herself at the center of a maelstrom of scientific and political attention as representatives sought to understand humanity's apparent gift for impossible diplomatic solutions. Her request for a quiet cup of tea to think things over was denied, as the Emergency Council insisted on immediate consultation. Dr. Ashworth, High Administrator Valorian asked, his bioluminescence flickering with urgent curiosity. How did humanity develop these seemingly supernatural diplomatic capabilities? What training or preparation allows humans to approach cosmic horrors with such casual confidence? Miranda considered the question while refilling her mug from a thermos that seemed to contain an inexhaustible supply of perfectly brewed tea. I don't think it's supernatural at all. I think we just never learned that some things are supposed to be impossible to talk to. When you assume that every being has feelings and motivations, you tend to approach them with curiosity rather than fear. The explanation satisfied no one while simultaneously making perfect sense to everyone. As the Emergency Council grappled with the philosophical implications of humanity's approach to cosmic threats, urgent preparations were being made to support Dr. Chen's unprecedented diplomatic mission. The next phase of humanity's strangest negotiation was about to begin, and the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance between cosmic horror and human kindness. Dr. Margaret Chen sat cross-legged on the crystalline surface of asteroid GAMMA7, her thermos of chamomile tea balanced carefully on her knee as she gazed up at the entity that had once been known as Omega-9. What hung before her in the void defied every attempt at description, a shifting mass of dark energy and folded space that seemed to exist in 17 dimensions simultaneously. Yet somehow, impossibly, it had been listening to her for the past 14 hours. You know, Margaret said, taking a thoughtful sip of her tea, loneliness is really one of the hardest things to bear. I can't imagine how difficult it must have been, sleeping alone in the dark for all those millions of years. The cosmic entity's response came not as words but as a gentle vibration in the fabric of reality itself, a sensation that Margaret's mind somehow translated into something resembling melancholy gratitude. Around them, the distorted space rippled with patterns that might have been considered beautiful if they weren't simultaneously terrifying. Through her communication device, Margaret could hear the increasingly frantic discussions taking place aboard the Emergency Council's command vessel. Admiral Nexus was coordinating evacuation fleets, Dr. Kronos was desperately trying to understand the physics of their conversation, and representatives from 47 species were debating whether to classify her as humanity's greatest diplomat or its most dangerous madwoman, Margaret. Came Captain Petrov's voice through the comlink. The Council is requesting an update on the entity's intentions. They need to know if the ceasefire will hold. Margaret glanced at the swirling mass of cosmic horror above her, noting the way its dimensional folds had softened from jagged tears in reality to something more resembling gentle curves. Oh, I think we're making real progress. Omega-9 was just telling me about the time it accidentally created a black hole while having a nightmare. It feels terrible about the civilizations that got caught up in that. The silence that followed her report was broken only by the sound of several Emergency Council members requiring medical attention. Dr. Ashworth's voice finally emerged from the chaos. Margaret, dear, are you saying that cosmic horrors can experience guilt? Of course they can, Margaret replied, offering a fresh cup of tea to the entity, which accepted it by somehow incorporating the beverage into its fundamental essence. Guilt, loneliness, confusion, fear. They're very old and very powerful, but that doesn't mean they don't have feelings. Omega-9 here has been carrying around guilt about accidental destructions for eons. No wonder it lashes out when it wakes up. High Administrator Valorian's bioluminescence flickered with what might have been hope or terror. Dr. Chen, can you determine the entity's current threat level? Is galactic evacuation still necessary? Margaret consulted the cosmic horror with the same casual manner she might have used to ask a friend about weekend plans. The entity's response caused local space-time to shiver with what she interpreted as embarrassment. Well, Omega-9 says it never meant to threaten anyone. It was just startled when it woke up and found all these little ships poking around. It's actually quite apologetic about the whole situation. Apparently, it's been having trouble controlling its powers since it doesn't get much practice being conscious. Dr. Kronos materialized via hologram on the asteroid's surface, his academic excitement overriding his terror of cosmic annihilation. Dr. Chen, this is unprecedented. Are you suggesting that cosmic horrors lack proper control over their reality-altering abilities? Think about it, Margaret said, refilling her thermos from a container that seemed to hold far more tea than physics would allow. If you only woke up once every few million years, you'd probably be a bit clumsy too. Omega-9 tells me it's like trying to write with a pen the size of a solar system. Very difficult, to be precise. The conversation was interrupted by urgent alerts from deep space monitoring stations. Admiral Nexus's voice carried a new note of alarm as she reported the latest developments. Margaret, we're detecting movement throughout the cosmic horror preservation zones. 7 additional entities are showing signs of awakening. Whatever you're doing, it's having effects far beyond the Arcturus system. Margaret looked up at Omega-9 with the expression of someone who had just discovered an unexpectedly complex garden problem. Oh dear. Are your friends waking up too? That could be complicated. The cosmic entity's response sent reality ripples throughout the system, but this time the distortions carried undertones of what Margaret recognized as social anxiety. The translation that formed in her mind was roughly equivalent to, I may have accidentally sent out a wake-up call when I got excited about having someone to talk to. Excited? Captain Petrov's voice cracked slightly. The entity was excited? Well, yes, Margaret said, as if this were the most natural thing in the galaxy. Imagine if you'd been sleeping alone for millions of years, and suddenly someone showed up who actually wanted to have a conversation. Omega-9 got a bit enthusiastic about sharing the experience with its friends. The implications of 7 additional cosmic horrors awakening simultaneously sent the Emergency Council into what could only be described as controlled panic. Admiral Nexus began coordinating the largest military mobilization in galactic history, while Dr. Kronos frantically calculated the probability of containing multiple reality-warping entities. Margaret. Dr. Ashworth's voice carried the weight of an entire civilization's hopes. Do you think you could possibly extend your diplomatic efforts to include these other entities? Margaret considered the question while observing the new distortions appearing throughout local space as ancient beings stirred from their eons-long slumber. I suppose I could try, but I'm running a bit low on tea, and I think we might need to approach this differently. 7 cosmic horrors all waking up at once sounds like a social gathering. The suggestion that cosmic horrors might require social coordination sent the xenopsychology department into theoretical meltdown. Dr. Vex Thornwick, the galaxy's leading expert on impossible psychology, managed to formulate a response despite his apparent philosophical breakdown. Dr. Chen, are you proposing that we treat the awakening of multiple cosmic horrors as a social event rather than an extinction scenario? Why not? Margaret replied, checking her thermos and finding it mysteriously full again. If they're all friends, and they haven't seen each other in millions of years, they're probably excited to catch up. The problem is that when cosmic horrors get together socially, they tend to accidentally unravel reality. What they need is someone to help them organize a proper reunion. What followed was the most surreal planning session in galactic history. Margaret, still sitting calmly on her asteroid while chatting with Omega-9, began coordinating what she termed the universe's most challenging tea party. Her requirements were simple but logistically staggering: a neutral meeting space large enough to accommodate 8 cosmic horrors, enough tea service for entities that existed in multiple dimensions, and what she called some nice snacks that won't accidentally achieve sentience. The Galactic Engineering Corps, working with resources from 17 different civilizations, began constructing The project required technologies that had been theoretical until that morning, including reality-stable architecture, and what the engineers termed existential catering equipment. Meanwhile, Margaret continued her conversations with Omega-9, learning about cosmic horror, culture, and social expectations. Apparently, she reported to the increasingly bewildered Emergency Council, they have very elaborate greeting rituals that involve reshaping local space-time into artistic patterns. The problem is that their idea of artistic expression tends to violate several fundamental laws of physics. Dr. Kronos, who had given up trying to understand the situation in favor of simply documenting it, raised a crucial concern. Dr. Chen, even if we can provide appropriate facilities, how do we prevent their social interactions from causing galactic-scale catastrophes? Margaret consulted with Omega-9, their conversation causing the asteroid to briefly exist in 7 dimensions simultaneously. Oh, that's easy. We just need to establish some ground rules. No reality restructuring during conversation, keep dimensional folding to a minimum, and absolutely no demonstrating powers that might accidentally create new forms of existence. Standard party etiquette, really. The arrival of the other cosmic horrors began 3 hours later. Each awakening entity brought its own reality distortions, creating a cascading effect that forced emergency protocols across half the galaxy. The first to fully manifest was an entity that the archives identified as Void Singer Terminus, whose consciousness seemed to be composed entirely of the spaces between thoughts. Margaret greeted it with the same cheerful politeness she had shown Omega-9. "Hello there. You must be one of Omega-9's friends. I'm Margaret, and I've brought tea. Would you like some? I have chamomile, green tea, and something called cosmic mint that I found in the ship's stores." The newly awakened horror's response created a brief temporal loop that caused Tuesday to happen twice, but Margaret simply adjusted her schedule accordingly and continued pouring tea. Within an hour, she had successfully established communication with all 7 awakened entities, each of which expressed surprise and delight at finding someone willing to engage in polite conversation. The cosmic horror reunion that followed required constant intervention from Margaret, who found herself serving as both hostess and diplomatic mediator. When Entropy Weaver Absolute accidentally began converting matter into pure possibility, Margaret gently suggested it might want to save that trick for later. When Shadowheart Infinity attempted to demonstrate its ability to exist in negative time, she politely redirected its attention to the tea service. "The key," she explained to the Emergency Council during a brief communication break, is treating them like very powerful, very old people who haven't socialized in a while. They get excited and sometimes forget their manners, but they're not malicious. They just need someone to remind them to be considerate of the local reality. The pocket dimension, constructed for the cosmic horror social gathering, became a marvel of engineering that defied conventional understanding. Reality remained stable despite the presence of 8 entities capable of unmaking existence through casual thought, largely because Margaret had established what she called tea time rules, that the horrors seemed happy to follow. High Administrator Valorian observed the proceedings through quantum-shielded sensors, his bioluminescence cycling through patterns that suggested profound philosophical confusion. "Dr. Chen, you've accomplished something that our greatest minds declared impossible. How do you maintain such calm in the presence of beings that could erase our civilization accidentally?" Margaret, now presiding over what appeared to be a cosmic horror book club discussion, considered the question while refilling teacups that existed in 17 dimensions. "I suppose it's because I don't think of them as cosmic horrors. They're just very old friends having a reunion. They needed someone to help them remember how to be social without breaking everything." The resolution came not with battle or sacrifice, but with what Margaret would later describe as a very successful tea party. The cosmic horrors, having enjoyed their first social gathering in millions of years, agreed to establish regular meetings in the specially constructed pocket dimension. They also accepted Margaret's suggestion that they should provide advance notice of future awakenings to avoid startling local civilizations. Omega-9, speaking for the group, expressed what Margaret translated as gratitude for the reminder that existence could be shared rather than endured in isolation. The entity also formally apologized for any inconvenience caused by their awakening and offered to help repair any damage their surprise reunion had caused to local spacetime. The Emergency Council's final report on the incident was classified at the highest levels, not for security reasons but because no one could figure out how to explain that the galaxy's greatest existential threat had been resolved through proper hostess etiquette and herbal tea service. Dr. Ashworth was appointed as the first Director of Cosmic Entity Relations, a position that primarily involved ensuring that Margaret had adequate tea supplies and dimensional communication equipment. The success of the Cosmic Horror Tea Party led to the establishment of similar diplomatic protocols for other supposedly impossible threats. Margaret Chen returned to her botanical research, though she now carried a special thermos designed by the Galactic Engineering Corps to remain functional in any number of dimensions. She also maintained her position as the galaxy's first Cosmic Horror Social Coordinator, a job that involved scheduling regular tea parties in pocket dimensions and helping ancient entities remember their social skills. The Cosmic Horrors, for their part, became some of the galaxy's most enthusiastic supporters of interspecies cooperation. They established a foundation dedicated to protecting developing civilizations from accidentally destructive awakening events and began offering their unique perspectives on existence to anyone brave enough to attend their monthly discussion groups. Years later, when asked about her greatest diplomatic achievement, Margaret would smile and pour another cup of tea. "It wasn't really that complicated," she would say. "Everyone needs someone to talk to. Even cosmic horrors, sometimes the scariest situations just need a little kindness and some really good tea." The galaxy had learned that sometimes the most impossible problems required the simplest solutions, and that the difference between cosmic horror and cosmic friendship might be nothing more than someone willing to offer a warm cup of tea and a patient ear. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.